Hey everyone, this is May with The May Lee Show. Thanks for joining us again for another episode. We've decided that we're going to be dedicating, episodes for the time being to covering the coronavirus pandemic for obvious reasons. This is something that's affecting each and every one of us. Doesn't matter who you are, what your background is, where you live, where you come from. This is affecting us all in multiple ways. And clearly, we are all concerned. We are all worried. We're anxious. Some of us are very fearful about things. Within the Asian and Asian American community, we have an extra layer of fear because of the growing racism that we are encountering either firsthand or hearing about. And believe me, at the May Lee Show and at Neck Shark, we are getting inundated with stories about racial related assaults, both verbal and physical. These hate crimes are going on everywhere. And some of them are so vicious and so criminal that it's heartbreaking. And I know a lot of you are angry. So am I. I'm, angry and frustrated. And so this is something that we really have to grapple with and learn how to deal with, not saying accept it, but we have to get a grip in terms of how do we cope with this growing fear? How can we manage it somehow? So this show that I put together, I was able to get a couple different experts together, at least on the health front. I talked to some ER doctors who are on the front lines, who will tell us about what's going on, what they're seeing, what they're experiencing, and some practical tips for us to implement in our lives and just to give us a little bit more information, because that's what we need right now. We need the information to be able to make decisions and also perhaps bring down the anxiety that we're all feeling. I also am going to be talking to a researcher at one of the pharmaceutical companies that is fast tracking a vaccine for COVID-19. Several companies are doing that. This particular company, Inovio, is close to starting clinical trials. So that's pretty exciting, but it's also very complex. So she is going to speak to me about what the process is and, what to expect. So that's a fascinating element to all of this. But before I get started with the show, I know that a lot of you have a lot on your mind, and I so appreciate the fact that you have been writing to the May Lee Show, sending me messages also through Neck Shark, and telling us how you're feeling, both the good, well, I should say all of it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I know this is a trying time. We're all feeling it. I'm not sleeping well, I'll admit it. I'm waking up anxious and wondering what the day is going to bring, because it seems like every day, every hour, sometimes every minute, something is changing. So there's a lot of ugliness going on because of the fear and the anxiety. There's a website now, or I should say a Facebook page that was created by the folks at Neck Shark called Crimes Against Asians, that is pretty much reporting all the things that are happening. And that's fine, because I think we need to raise that level of awareness and educate people about this. But on the flip side, we also have to remember that we can't dwell in that ugliness. We can certainly take that information, but also decide, okay, what are we going to do about this? How are we going to manage this? And I will be doing another episode where we're going to be talking about the psychological impacts, but also talking about how we can cope with it from a psychological point of view, behaviorally, but also a security point of view. So that's in another episode that we're working on right now. But there's also a lot of goodness coming out. There's another Facebook page that's called The Kindness Pandemic, and that is posting stories about what the goodness that's coming out of this, people helping each other, people really going out of their way to show compassion. And that is what we need more of right now, especially now, towards our elders. Kids are worried. We're all worried. So just to show more compassion through action of any kind, I think that's great that they're documenting this. And I think it's great that we can read about it, and it's happening all over the world. So Without further ado, let's get going with this episode. Here we go. All right, I'm now joined by Celina Thum. She is board certified emergency physician and the director of emergency medicine ultrasound at a very busy level 1 trauma center in New York. Dr. Thum, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's just get right to it. You're an ER doctor, so obviously you've been on the front lines of dealing with coronavirus since the get-go. Tell me what it has been like. What have you been witnessing firsthand?
I think I went through all of the emotions like most of us did. When I first heard about this epidemic in China, we have people coming from the airport, so we were aware to screen for it. But for many weeks on end, it just was, there was no events at all. And it definitely has quickly evolved into the situation in which we see today.
Right. So at first, it's almost as if we all reacted the same way, right? We just thought, oh, this is just something and it's going to go away quickly. So therefore, maybe the immediate sort of response wasn't what it should have been, even though it started getting a lot worse in China. So do you think that it was a little bit maybe miscalculated in the beginning by everyone?
I think it was miscalculated, and to be fair, the risk was fairly low when it was contained in China.
Right.
But since we're in a day and age where travel is so easy, it's very global.
Yeah.
As soon as you start hearing pockets of disease elsewhere, that's when you start to really have to hunker down. Otherwise, you get behind the ball.
Yeah.
And it's really important to be able to contain, which means to test for anyone with symptoms, and really understand that you might have to go overboard with testing at first because you're really unfamiliar with what the disease process even looks like.
Right. Well, speaking of testing, that seems to be still to this day the problem, right? There aren't enough tests. Even people who want to get tested, who seem to have the symptoms, can't get tested. So again, from your frontline vantage point, are you seeing this still happen right now in the ER and when you're trying to figure out what's wrong with people coming in?
Yes, I was definitely told about our limited ability to test from the get-go, but I've seen it evolve because now I have more and more friends and family each day that have symptoms that are calling me what to do. And these are people that, I've educated very well. They've already called their local public health department. They've called hospitals. They're trying to find a place where they can get evaluation. And in the end, if they're not having difficulty breathing or need of respiratory support, I tell them, I wish I could lay hands on you with protective equipment. I wish I could come and help you and talk you through this. But right now, you need to separate yourself from friends and family, find people who can help you through the next 2 weeks and really isolate yourself. And it makes it really hard when you don't have that support network as well.
Well, and it makes it really hard to even know how serious this virus is and how fast it's spreading when you can't even test people who are saying, I think I have it, right? And you still can't give them the test.
And it's even more difficult because we know as health professionals that this disease starts off the same way for everybody. Little or no symptoms. Then, depending on how long it lasts, you see a dramatic increase in viral load and symptoms come up. And it's still, we don't know how to predict who's going to get to that point or not.
Right.
So while, I could be telling a patient, stay home, you're okay now, I really hope that that patient has enough awareness to come back if things get worse, or call 911 when they're in distress and need to be hospitalized. So right now we're only testing in the New York area. We're only testing people who are sick enough to require hospitalization, because that has a lot to do with where they go and how protected our gear is around them, because we do have a limited protective gear supply. We don't have enough masks and gowns. So we really have to learn to cohort this disease together. And that's what we're using our few tests for now.
Well, that's the other issue that you guys on the front lines are dealing with, right? It's the personal protective gear that you need to safely deal with some of these patients and even administer those tests. It's not like you can just do it openly without that protective gear. And so that's also in short supply. So it's a combination of so many things that you need but don't have. So that must make, I mean, honestly, Dr. Thum, I can't even imagine. That must make your job just exponentially harder.
It's been difficult because there hasn't been a consistent federal response to kind of guide us what to do.
Yeah.
The CDC has changed its recommendations from day to day. I've probably could recite to you the website by now. Initially, the CDC had required N95 masks when dealing with persons under investigation. That's what we call people who we suspect have COVID.
Okay.
And because those masks were in short supply, they changed the recommendation to only surgical masks, face shield, and gown, unless we're doing a high risk procedure like intubation, which is putting a breathing tube down someone's throat. And at first, we were told to ration those masks, so we weren't wearing them all the time. We would only do it if we thought someone might have it. But then it really led to a reduction of our workforce because not everyone with COVID presented with the classical symptoms.
Okay.
So then we were losing people who had to be forced into quarantine because they had been, treating a patient and then that later tested positive.
Oh, I see.
And unfortunately, the testing turnaround as well has taken days. And I'm not just speaking from my own experience. I've surveyed many physicians around this area. ER community is very tight knit.
Yeah.
We see the same thing happening out on the West Coast as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any high volume city is really seeing the effects first.
Right.
I'm not sure if the message is getting out to more rural areas. So sometimes these emergency lockdown type situations might not make sense yet to some people.
Well, I mean, we're starting to hear more and more of this messaging getting out publicly on a daily basis through the media, as well as the press conferences that the experts are having. But like you're saying, there's mixed messages that keep on coming out, right? So even for you, a doctor, you often get a little bit confused. So can you imagine what, the average person feels? So then tell me, I know that there's also an issue of if this really spikes and, worst case scenario is a lot of people are predicting that this is really going to spike because the tests are going to be done, more and more tests will be done. And then there's going to be more and more need for respirators and ventilators, right? And that's equipment and ICU beds. That's in limited supply in hospitals, right? For instance, where you are, I'm sure you guys are already thinking, wow, if we all of a sudden have a flood of patients, what are we going to do?
Exactly. And at our hospital, we're doing the best we can to prepare.
Yeah.
It's kind of an easy call because we're in the city and we are expecting that high volume.
Yeah.
So we've canceled all of the elective procedures and tests to make room in the ORs, to make respirators available, ventilators available. And that is what I mean by there's no overarching message from our federal government.
Right.
To mandate that throughout the U.S.
Right. In fact, President Trump just today in a press conference said that the governors in the states should take, just get their supplies if they can. So it was, again, that disconnect in terms of no overall kind of policy that everyone could adhere to and follow. So it makes it even more, I mean, obviously it creates even more panic then, don't you think? I mean, and you're supposed to remain calm as a doctor, but I would imagine that when you hear something like that, you're like, well, what are we supposed to do?
Exactly. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
As much as we can obsess over, Twitter arguments and,
Yeah.
Facebook politics, the answer is we've been thrown into almost an experiment where we see who can react and plan for this the best.
Right.
Because this is not anything that has ever happened before.
No, it's unprecedented, clearly on every level. Can I ask you though, personally, and I'm sure you probably have discussions with your colleagues in this field, do you worry about yourself? I mean, you're on the front line.
Whoever says they don't, I mean, some of my leaders in my department say they don't.
Yeah.
And that's part of being a physician. We have to make sure that we don't scare staff, especially the staff that are on the front lines with us.
Yeah.
We have to show, and to be honest, it's been so busy that aspect hasn't really hit yet. All it will take is a few of us getting sick from this, and then it's going to hit a lot closer to home. There are, unfortunately, already, I know of 2 emergency physicians that are in critical condition.
Oh, boy.
I know that, my thoughts go out to them and their family, and I hope they do well.
Yeah.
We're definitely at risk, and to say that I'm not scared would be false.
Yeah. And
there's always that risk.
You know what? Nobody would blame you for feeling that way. Absolutely. The fact that you guys are doing this day in and day out, knowing the risks, but still willing to do it. That's why you guys are the true heroes on the front lines. And you can't get enough praise from the public for doing what you're doing.
Regardless, all of us love what we do. We don't think twice about it. Most of our fear comes with exposing our friends and family, should that happen.
Right.
So it's not a fear of going to the job. It's a fear of, the consequences of getting ill.
Sure. Dr. Thum, can I then ask you from sort of just practical advice for our viewers and listeners? We're getting so many messages of confusion and fear and what should I do and things like that. So what are some of the common things you're hearing from people, and what do you tell them about this virus and how it's spread and what they should do and what they should look out for?
Yeah, so right now, while widespread testing isn't available, if you do have symptoms, that could involve fever, cough, shortness of breath. There are even some people have diarrhea. I would, try and isolate yourself in a room away from other family members that aren't symptomatic. Definitely call your primary care doctor. And unfortunately, I have a lot of patients that don't have a primary care doctor. Other options instead is called the Department of Health. Okay, you go online, Google this, call the number. Maybe it's busy, maybe it's not. Call hospitals. Other thing that is being widely used and I think should be expanded is the use of telemedicine. That way you can consult with someone who is familiar with urgent and acute care, kind of get some guidance on what to do.
Right.
CDC.gov, you can go there to kind of, they've made it a lot clearer on what you should do if you have symptoms or you feel like you're exposed. And that kind of outlines what I just mentioned previously. I would also, before, excuse my language, shit hits the fan, make a list of your medical conditions, what medications you have. Make sure you have them in stock at your home for the next 90 days. Have a plan with friends, families, neighbors even. Actually, I live in a complex. I'm trying to meet with the manager to kind of have a plan. If someone needs food, water, we can get that to them. We don't want there to be some stigma of having an infection. We want to know what's going on and try and help everyone through the process. Check on, do elderly wellness checks would be important at this time too. So having your medical conditions and your medications and emergency contacts all out, really preparing ahead of time before, God forbid, things explode.
Right. Yeah, we do have to prepare for the worst just in case. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but we should be realistic about the possibilities, right? The one thing that I think a lot of folks are starting to really kind of come down on is this whole idea of social distancing and people not adhering to it, right? Especially the millennials, because they think that they're okay, or even if they get the virus, they're not going to be sick. But I can't stress, I keep saying this to people over and over again, and now we're starting to hear it across the board. You know what? It doesn't matter, because you will spread it and you will kill somebody else because of it. And we have to be that harsh about it, don't we?
Absolutely. There's data coming out of South Korea that shows that the most people who carry COVID, because if you don't know, South Korea pretty much tested almost the entire population.
Yeah.
The peak of it was between 20 and 30. So a lot of 20, 30-year-olds had COVID. Then you go to Italy, who had testing a little bit more similar to us, where they're only testing the people who are hospitalized and dying. And you see that the sicker people who end up unfortunately passing from this disease are in their 50s and ups. So that is how we infer that 20 to 30-year-olds are carriers of the disease.
Wow.
And so exactly what you said. We don't have a way to identify who has it right now because we can't test. So our best hope for all of our elderly is just to stay at home.
Right. And then tell the millennials to stay at home too. I mean, they can't think they can run around.
Before.
Yeah, exactly. No,
I lay in the realm of being a millennial,
okay.
But I'm an older millennial. So.
And you're a doctor who's like taking care of people, so that's okay. You're excused from this group, but I think it's a dire warning that people need to really heed. They cannot take this lightly anymore. This is an absolute crisis that we have never seen in our lifetimes.
Yes, everyone has a duty to do their part. Yeah. Otherwise, it's going to be a wake-up call, unfortunately, for all of us. I don't know if even I'm mentally prepared. It's kind of like one of my colleagues said, we've done planning. Now it's just like waiting for a Category 5 hurricane to touch down.
Yeah. Wow. So to hear that from a doctor who is seeing it firsthand, that's a very sobering statement that you're making. But I think one that needs to be said in truth. We cannot sugarcoat this. We cannot sidestep it. We can't ignore it. We have to confront it and take it, face on and just deal with it. And deal with it in a practical and realistic manner.
Yeah. And I just want to add, don't panic. Yeah. Like you said, most people who get it pretty much have little to no symptoms. But we want to protect all of Americans.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
Do your part.
Okay. Well, Dr. Thum, thank you so much for your time. But I think I want to thank you even more for the work that you're doing to care for people and to put yourself out there on the front line in danger, but you're doing it because that's your job and this is what you love doing. But thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. We'll talk again soon. I would love an update from you. All right. Until then, please take care of yourself.
Yes, you too. Stay safe.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Okay, now to get a West Coast perspective of what's going on in hospitals and what doctors are dealing with, I'm now joined by Dr. John Kim. He is an emergency medicine specialist. He works for Scripps Clinic Medical Group in San Diego, but he's also an independent emergency physician, which means he's kind of called upon to go to various hospitals all over the place when they are in need. And obviously, that's probably on the rise for him. Hey, Dr. Kim, welcome to the May Lee Show. I'm so glad you could join us.
Good morning, May. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, sure. Well, listen, I know that this is crazy times that we're all going through. And I can imagine that for you as a doctor, especially an ER doctor, it must be even more insane. So can you give me your perspective? We just spoke to a doctor in New York about what she's seeing and what she's going through. Tell me what your experience has been so far.
Well, I mean, just like society, this whole coronavirus pandemic definitely hit us by surprise. A lot of the healthcare systems out here weren't really expecting a pandemic or even an epidemic to be occurring. So it did kind of catch us a little off guard. Yeah. I will say that all the hospital systems that I've worked at, including my main one here in San Diego, has aggressively been rolling out per CDC guidelines the best thing to do in order to not only treat these patients, but to also handle the current and potential large amount of influx of patients who will be coming in with regards to not only being affected by this disease, but also with all the anxiety and all the hysteria that's now ensued because of this disease, because people, frankly, are just worried about their health and they want to make sure or not.
That's what I'm curious about, actually. Are you seeing people just rushing into ER thinking that they have it with no symptoms, but they're just freaking out?
Absolutely. I get that probably more so than I do get cases where I actually feel that there's a high clinical suspicion that they do have it. Unfortunately, kind of unlike our home country of South Korea, where they were rolling out tests, thousands per million for the population there, and being able to test people, population wide. Yeah. Unfortunately, here our tests are limited in the sense that I'm left with the task of trying to go by CDC guidelines to figure out who do I actually test and who do I not. And so unfortunately, I do have to turn a lot of people away, or have to at least have a conversation with them, saying, you know what, if you don't meet these guidelines and if you don't have these symptoms, I technically can't use one of our limited tests for you just to see if you have it or not.
Right. It's like you're having to ration these tests. And also what must be difficult for you guys, and Dr. Thum, who I interviewed just before you, they were saying that, the guidelines keep changing. The CDC guidelines keep changing and shifting. And, so it's hard for you guys even to keep track of what the new guideline is to follow. So therefore it adds to the confusion for everyone.
Yeah, so the guidelines actually not only change with the way we screen patients and figure out who is a candidate for testing, but the CDC guidelines are also changing for us personally in healthcare on what we can do to protect ourselves, on what the guidelines are of what we need to be wearing, of how we need to be wearing things. I think the latest CDC guidelines that I checked on this morning said that, and this has actually been effective now. So when I go to work here in about an hour, we're now required to wear masks at all times. I need to go into a room and make sure that I keep myself with a social distancing 2-meter guideline before I even approach a patient, before I enter the patient care space, and stuff like that. And this was not existent like last week. This wasn't a guideline. Wow. Last week, we're trying to figure out, do I put on, an N95 respirator mask for this patient, or can I just get away with just wearing a regular mask? Do I need to get fully gowned out for this patient? There was no real set guidelines, and now it sounds like they're actually pulling out, okay, this is what we want everyone to do. So it's getting more specific, which is good, because now there's less ambivalence and there's less questions and wondering are we all doing the same thing? Now it sounds like everyone's kind of rolling out the same guidelines and the same systems, which is absolutely necessary in this kind of a nationwide, worldwide.
Yeah. I mean, national guideline would be the best thing for overall policy on handling this coronavirus, because it seems like it's being piecemealed, by state, sometimes city by city, right? But let's then talk about what you're faced with now. Okay, so you're still dealing with patients coming in, not enough tests. And now, of course, we're hearing there aren't going to be enough facilities, not enough ICU beds, not enough respirators, ventilators, and like you said, protective equipment for doctors. So does that, for people that you work with, do you all talk about this and have major concerns about how this is really going to be handled?
Absolutely. Yeah, you really hit the nail on the head in the sense that that's what the current situation in my industry is right now, is how are we going to not have what happened to Italy happen?
Right.
In the sense that how are we going to so-called flatten the curve? And that's basically the theory and the practice that we're all trying to roll out here across nationwide. And that essentially is what is encouraging people to keep, staying at home, staying away from large gathering events, et cetera. And so what we're trying to do is essentially keep the influx of people low so that we can at least figure out what we're going to do so that we don't end up with a situation like that.
Right.
The situation that we are seeing here is that, yes, there probably will, as more and more tests roll out, because more and more are becoming available and more are getting shipped to us from other countries and different manufacturers, is that we will still have, we expect there to be a lot more people coming in to get tested. And now that the situation has changed where it's not just travel exposed coronavirus, but now it's community spread coronavirus, where even people who don't have the traditional risk factors of, have you traveled to an endemic area in the last 14 days, or have you been in contact with someone who's been under investigation for COVID-19? Now you can have someone who, we've had some cases that tested positive, of people who came in with no risk factors, and they just got it because of, the spread of the virus within the community.
Right.
Now, from that, we expect that there's going to be a lot more people coming in who we may not be able to say, oh, you're on our radar, because now the radar is all distorted.
So do you think it's going to have to be a case of really ramping up testing, even if people don't fall under those strict CDC guidelines of who can and cannot be tested? I mean, you mentioned, Dr. Kim, of Korea, right? South Korea was able to have a better control over, the coronavirus once it started spreading, because they started doing massive amounts of testing. Whereas here, we're still not doing that. So is that what it's going to take?
I believe so. They've shown it to work effectively. And it's not so much the fact that we're trying to decide if you have it or not. It's more the fact that we want to decide, if you do have it, how can we mitigate your risk from spreading it to those who can be, detrimentally affected by this.
Right.
Then being able to then enforce things like, a citywide or a countrywide, stay-at-home policy, et cetera. And that's what we're really trying to do, is just trying to, from an epidemiological standpoint, figure out who all has this coronavirus, and therefore be able to then mitigate it so that the healthcare system and our ability to treat those who are really ill from it and those who are ill in general from other things doesn't get flooded, doesn't get inundated.
Right. I see my dog decided to join the interview in the background. I don't know if you see her, but she's very interested in what you have to say.
Oh, what? Yeah. We have the same looking dog.
Oh, really? I have two. Two. So the other one's sleeping in the corner. But anyway, I didn't want you to be distracted by the fact that my dog just walked into the shot.
I almost thought I was looking at Sadie in my reflection. I was like, wait a minute. But she's actually sitting right in front of me.
Okay. Well, I thank God for my dogs that they relieve the tension and anxiety during these difficult times, I think, for all of us. So, but anyway, back to what we were talking about. So testing has to be increased, but also we're hearing, cities and states now really clamping down on the social distancing. And so therefore they're really trying to increase measures to keep that, kind of those gatherings smaller, and really telling people just stay home. Right. And I'm wondering, from a doctor's point of view, does it frustrate you when people don't take this seriously enough?
Yes, it does. From a system-wide standpoint, it does frustrate me, because I know that if people didn't take that seriously, what would happen to not only my industry, but because, the thing is, if my industry gets overflooded, then the people don't get the care that they need. So then it comes back to everyone, and then, people get sick and they die.
Right.
So our whole goal with keeping people not contained, but essentially trying to keep the spread of the virus contained by keeping people social distanced, by keeping people at home, by preventing the spread to especially large condensed areas, is so that so that when people, the actual rise of people actually getting sick isn't going to spike. And as long as people have that spike, the healthcare system can keep up with the virus, can keep up with the treatment. And the goal is to then have less mortality.
Right.
And that's essentially what the whole flattening of the curve is that we're not trying to prevent people from getting infected by the virus. What we're trying to do is prevent those who are going to die from the virus because we don't have the healthcare resources and the manpower to keep up with it.
And therefore, if you flatten the curve, then at least you won't be flooded in the hospitals with very sick people and then not have enough, of the equipment to be able to care for those very sick people if it spikes too much. So that's what people have to understand. So I'm really glad you put it that way, actually, Dr. Kim, because it's not about trying to prevent it per se. It's just about preventing the spike and really ill people, and that spike in really ill people who all need to be hospitalized, and then there's not going to be enough facilities.
Right. So looking at the curve, there's a whole bunch of curves of this published online when you just Google flattening the curve.
Right.
So anyone listening to this can definitely see and follow along in the sense that the area under the curve, whether it's the flat curve or the spike curve, is the same. And what that means is that over time, the number of those infected will probably be very, very similar. It's just that the height of the curve is basically those who get infected over a shorter period of time. If it's over a shorter period of time, the spike gets higher. If it's over a longer period of time, the spike is somewhat flatter.
Right.
And by keeping it flat is what actually helps us keep up with treating those who then get sick. So that I compare it to like a bathroom stall. You go to a bathroom and there's 3 stalls in there.
Yeah.
If the entire office floor rushes to the bathroom at the same time, you're going to have problems.
Right.
However, if people go one by one, once every hour, there's no problems there.
Right.
Even if the same number of people go to the bathroom throughout the same day.
Yeah.
So like trying to mitigate the risk of a big spike.
Yeah, that's a good analogy, actually, the bathroom. So, Dr. Kim, I never want to try to sound pessimistic or doom and gloom, but I also think that for people who are listening and watching who still don't think this is serious enough, I want you to tell us, worst case scenario, and also what have you personally seen someone really gravely ill from this virus?
I have seen one person gravely ill, and it was actually recently. And it hasn't been confirmed whether or not they have it, if they have actually tested positive for coronavirus SARS-2. The test is still pending.
What do you mean pending? It hasn't come back? The results?
Right. So a lot of times these results aren't immediate, unlike a lot of our tests that we have in the laboratory.
Okay.
A lot of hospitals now are acquiring tests where they can become more immediate, but a lot of these tests are send-outs to central processing labs in a different part of the state.
Which is also a problem because the turnaround time is so long.
Yes, but the thing is, at least from a healthcare standpoint, there isn't a specific treatment or a specific antidote for coronavirus. Just like any other viruses, the way we treat these patients, from those with no to mild to even severe symptoms, is with what we call supportive care. And so, unfortunately, this is why this virus is so harsh on those who are elderly and those who have a lot of comorbidities, which basically means that you have a lot of other health problems that make your immune system compromised. In that when they do get inflicted with the coronavirus and then the body then ensues its immune response to it and then creates all sorts of respiratory havoc and whatnot, those who are weaker are the ones who tend to need more aggressive and critical medical care.
Right. So the person that is gravely ill right now that you know of, are they elderly or what's their condition? Yeah,
they were elderly. And oftentimes, at least the cases that I've seen, it's a lot of people who come from skilled nursing facilities. So definitely the elderly population. There are cases that I have read in the younger population, those who have some sort of immunocompromisation. And there are even some cases out there that do fall out of that curve too, some outliers who, are not elderly, who are not immunocompromised. So, there's always that risk too, although that is not the common case.
Right, right. I asked Dr. Thum the same question I'm going to ask you right now. I know this is your job and you're a doctor and you have to face any sort of ailment and illness, sickness, because that's what you do, right?
Mm-hmm.
But does this scare you personally, this particular virus?
It changes day by day. I think in the beginning, I will have to admit that I definitely downplayed it when the first, idea of the coronavirus first came out, because, for me, I deal with viruses, especially respiratory viruses, on a daily basis, the cold to influenza, and I do remember the pandemics of like SARS and MERS and when that all came out. And so I attributed this to kind of being another, one of those that should be able to be quickly contained, and it shouldn't have such a high infectivity rate. But then that changed because, this thing exponentially grew overnight. And so now the concern is not so much the fact that, me as a 38-year-old overall healthy person, if I were to go by the stats that the CDC produces and all the statistics out there, am I personally afraid of the virus and what it's going to do to me? Going by the stats, I would have to say no. What I'm more afraid of is basically how this is going to affect society. And we've already seen the effects on that, not only with our economy, but just with the health of the population as a whole, especially the elderly, but then even socially too.
Yes.
So that's actually what I'm more afraid about, is the consequences of something like this. And if people don't take it seriously, it's not so much that it's only our health that we need to worry about, but it's everything else that we call life that we need to worry about too. Yeah.
And speaking of social, as you know, the Asian community is also suffering because of the racism, the xenophobia that's being caused by the fear of this virus. And so that's an added layer of fear and anxiety that's being created within the Asian population here, which leads me to one question I need to ask you. We're also hearing reports of people actually refusing care from an Asian doctor because they're scared. I'm just curious if you've run into that at all. I hope not, but have you run into that at all, or have you heard about others running into this?
So in the workplace, I haven't run into any sort of xenophobia like that.
Okay,
although
good.
it's a funny story to tell, because I do work in a very rural, small ER in Arizona, where it's predominantly one race. It's Caucasian out there. And I think at any given moment when I fly in, I think I'm the only Asian person in that town. So I kind of boost that little minority census, like big time I fly in for work. Right. But I do remember it didn't actually happen to me in the workplace, but it did happen to me when I was out getting food to prepare my meals for my shift. Where I saw some people in the checkout line kind of trying to distance themselves from me because they thought that perhaps, and then perhaps if I was a carrier because I was Asian. And the reason why I know that was because that person, had made a comment being like, oh, we don't really see too many of them around here. Just be careful.
Oh, boy.
And then I didn't really make anything of it because I just kind of chalked it up to either ignorance or whatever. But the funny thing is that later that night, I saw that same person in my ER. Right. And then they came to me and they said, wow, are you a new doctor here? And they started talking to me. And actually, we ended up having a very friendly conversation. And we actually did touch base on the whole idea of coronavirus and the fact that it did come from, Wuhan, China, et cetera, and how that doesn't necessarily, propagate to Asian Americans because.
Isn't that interesting?
The last time I've been in China. So it's like, it's basically just a little, for me, at least it panned out to the point like where just a little bit of friendly, non-hostile conversation led to more education and led to more understanding than it did to more hostility and more xenophobia.
That's what it is. It is about education. It's about raising awareness. Because, look, fear makes people do really stupid things and jump to conclusions without that information, right? So therefore, that's why we're doing these shows. We've got to get that information out there so that the awareness goes up, the information gets out there, then people are more educated. So what an interesting situation you were in, though. That's crazy. That's a great story. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. All right. Well, before we go, Dr. Kim, any piece of advice, anything that you can tell our audience to make them feel a little bit more assured or, lessen their anxiety a little bit, or any sort of practical tip that you could share?
I would say try not to be too overconsumed with the social environment that's going on right now, with the world environment that's going on right now. This is a pandemic, this is a virus, but this isn't the first time, that we as a human race or we as a people have seen before. What I want to encourage people to do more is not only practice personal hygiene and personal responsibility for your own health, but more so just do your part as being part of a community in order to help out the greater system. That's why the whole flattening the curve thing is something that I strongly advocate, not only for the healthcare industry, but just for everyone else in general, because everything affects each other. So as long as you play your part, do what's best for yourself, wash your hands, then do what's best for society in turn will then lead to better outcomes overall.
Yeah. Good advice, Dr. Kim. And I think maybe the silver lining in all of this is people are going to be able to realize what it takes to come together and work together as a community to help each other out. So let's hope that is the end result here, that there's something that's good that comes out of this. But Dr. Kim, listen, thank you for your contribution as a doctor. I mean, more than ever, we need you guys and we need you to stay healthy. But the sacrifices that you're making for the greater good, it's priceless. And so I know me and all of our viewers and listeners thank you with all of our hearts for the work that you're doing. So really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Okay. Take care of yourself, please. And let's stay in touch. Okay.
Definitely. Take care too.
Okay. All right.
All right. Thanks, May.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
So now we've heard from doctors who are on the front lines in emergency rooms, both in New York and Southern California, and what they're facing because of this coronavirus 19. But now we're going to turn to some researchers who are in the labs trying to figure out what this virus is all about, and more importantly, working on vaccines. We've all heard about this, and we all know that it takes quite a bit of time, but what's fascinating is that this crisis has become so big that a lot of these companies are fast-tracking their research to try to get these vaccines ready. As we heard, just yesterday, a company was already beginning clinical trials on humans up in Seattle. So that's an interesting development. But there are many other companies doing exactly the same thing. One of those companies is Inovio. They are based in Philadelphia, but their lab is in San Diego. And so now I'm going to introduce you guys to Dr. Kate Broderick. She is an accomplished scientist and recognized vaccine expert working on discovering and developing DNA medicines in her role as Inovio's Senior Vice President of Research and Development. Dr. Broderick, welcome to the May Lee Show. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me, May.
So, Dr. Broderick, let's just cut to the chase here. The vaccine. Everybody's talking about wanting this vaccine, clearly because this is a pandemic, but people have to realize it takes a lot of time. Inovio is working on one, and you have been working on it since the beginning. Tell me where you stand right now with that vaccine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I understand everybody's frustration and maybe confusion in regards to why is this taking so long, because the situation we're in. Unfortunately, as you quite rightly said, May, developing vaccines doesn't happen overnight, although, of course, I'm sure we all wish it would.
Right.
So at the moment, we first got the genetic sequence of the virus on the 10th of January, and we need to remind ourselves that that's, 2 months ago.
Right.
And actually, we're going to be testing that vaccine in the clinic in April, so in just a few weeks' time. So, just bear in mind that we are talking only about 4 months from kind of finding out what about this virus to actually being able to test it in humans, which really is unprecedented. But I do understand that people, really want it ready tomorrow.
Yeah, of course. And I think because the average person doesn't understand what it really entails to try to come up with a vaccine from the beginning to the end. And so just to put this into context, 4 months is what, half the time, a fraction of the time that it would normally take?
An average development time would be certainly in the year to years time frame. So this is way less than half of what we would standardly expect. And certainly in my own career, this is the fastest by far that I've ever been involved in a program like this.
That is incredible.
really quite remarkable.
Yeah, yeah. So that obviously tells us about the height of urgency that everyone's feeling about trying to get a vaccine, as well as drugs to be able to deal with the sickness. Let's go back then to when this first happened. This outbreak started, developing in China. You obviously heard about it. What was your thought from that moment? Did you think that it was ever going to come to this?
Yeah. And it's funny, May, because it's one of those moments that I think I'll remember for the rest of my life. I was standing in my kitchen, drinking my morning tea, flicking through the news on my phone, and I read about this kind of as yet unidentified cluster of pneumonia cases in China. And as a scientist, I thought, wow, that's very interesting. I'll keep an eye on that. And then it was over the next few days that it started really concerning me, because from sort of a cluster of 5 to 10 patients, then we started to get into the hundreds, and of course, as we all know, then into the thousands.
Right.
And really, very early on, I think as a scientist, I was aware that this was not looking like a good situation. But as you said, could I ever have imagined that we would be in the situation we are today, where many, many cities, states are essentially in lockdown? No, absolutely not. It's still very hard for me to get my head around. And that's somebody who's worked on this day in and day out for 2.5 straight months. So I can't imagine how confusing and concerning the situation is to people who are less connected with the situation.
And this is coming from somebody who your career is all about studying these diseases and viruses and pandemics, and trying to figure out how to deal with them. So that tells us all that this is something that no one really has ever experienced before.
Absolutely. Certainly, I've never experienced anything like this in my own career. And just to give you an idea, I've worked on Ebola, I've worked on MERS, I've worked on Zika, I've worked on Lassa. So it's not a shortage of exposure, pardon the pun, to kind of other emerging viruses. It's just that the situation we're in at the moment, as scientists, we're learning about a virus that we didn't even know existed a few months ago. So just that dearth of knowledge that we're trying to build up on a daily basis, it really is quite overwhelming.
Right. Well, so tell me then, Dr. Broderick, what is so different about COVID-19 compared to the other viruses you just talked about, Ebola and MERS and all of those? Why is this one so different?
Yeah, and I think it's, again, that I think can be confusing, because, we think of a virus just as an entity, but really they're all extremely have individual characteristics that make them, all of them challenging, but certainly different in certain aspects. And the one thing about COVID-19, the virus that causes COVID-19, is its ability to spread. And I think, we've all seen that, on a first-hand basis. It started in that cluster in China, and it's now really pretty widespread across the globe. I think as awful and as devastating as the Ebolas of the world are, they just didn't have that ability to kind of spread globally, what we're seeing with nCoV at the moment. And that's what makes it incredibly challenging to attempt to kind of control this outbreak.
And so hard to detect, because it's asymptomatic in a lot of carriers. And that's what makes it, I guess, a lot more frightening in terms of the spread.
Absolutely. When I remember when I first read that people could be asymptomatic for 14 days, and that is just a horrifying figure. That is absolutely not what you want to hear when you're trying to control an outbreak, because as you quite rightly mentioned, people are walking around not even feeling ill. I mean, they're not doing anything irresponsible because they don't even know they're infected.
Right.
So controlling the spread of a virus like that is very difficult without the proper tools.
I mean, you really can't make up a worse kind of, I guess, virus, because it's so silent and so undetectable in that way. Well, let's go back to the vaccine that Inovio is working on. Did you right away decide, okay, we need to start this right away, we need to start doing the research right away? Tell me about that process.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, read about it whilst having a cup of tea. But at that point, we didn't even know it was a coronavirus. We knew it was a virus. We didn't know it was a coronavirus.
Okay.
So over the days, we started to gain some kind of insight into the pathogen itself. And then on the 10th of January, the Chinese authorities released the genetic sequence of the virus. And that really was a key event for us, because that allowed us to pull the trigger on our efforts to design a vaccine against COVID-19. And actually, using our technology, we came up with a design in 3 hours. Remarkable speed. Immediately put that vaccine into manufacturing and started testing the vaccine in the laboratory, whilst also in parallel manufacturing up enough doses that we'll be able to start the clinical trial, as I say, in April.
Wow. So was that a 24/7 operation for you and your team?
Yeah, yes, and that's not an exaggeration. It was literally a 24/7 operation. And just when, thinking the scale of a sort of standard development timeline is, as I said, at least many months to potentially years, we're trying to squeeze that into a few short weeks. So just the coordination that takes to kind of pull something like that off really takes complete and utter dedication. And I'm so proud of the team here at Inovio who have just worked day and night to make this happen.
That is incredible. So how does it look to you as from your perspective right now in terms of the vaccine that Inovio has come up with? You obviously will start the trials next month in humans. So from your perspective and your experience, is it looking good? I mean, in terms of what you have come up with?
One of the elements of our technology that puts us in a really strong position, I think, is that we're the leading developer of a vaccine against another coronavirus, MERS. So we've actually put that through phase 2 testing. So although they're not identical viruses, they're very similar. Okay. So a lot of what we learned from working with MERS, we were able to apply against COVID-19. So I think that puts our vaccine design and development strategy really in a strong position. And also the work that we've done so far in the laboratory gives me a lot of confidence that this is going to test well when we put it into human beings in the clinic.
Wow, that's certainly good news. So again, for the layperson, they have to understand that it's not just one trial and that's it, and then boom. Tell us step by step then what that takes. The clinical trial starts in April, and then what then happens in terms of the time frame?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a complex process. And I do want to reiterate that it's important that it's a complex process, because that really safeguards everybody's safety and ensures that we're delivering what we're meant to be delivering. So we start off with what we call a phase 1 trial, which is what we're starting in April. And that's really primarily just checking to see that the vaccine's safe. And also that it performs what we call immunogenicity. So we'll be taking samples from these volunteer subjects, taking blood samples from them and looking to see what kind of antibody and T cells they generate. And that's going to be in a relatively small group of people, somewhere between 30 to 50 people.
Okay.
On the basis of the data that we generate from that trial, we will immediately use that to support the filing, what we call it. So we would go to the FDA and say, look, this is the data we've generated in a small group of people. Are you willing to allow us to scale this up to a larger group of people, potentially in the hundreds, even possibly into the thousands? And specifically target people potentially in the population who might actually come across the virus. So, and I'm thinking here about medical personnel, first responders, people like that. So that was what potentially we could do in a phase 2 trial. And in that case, we would be looking for what we call efficacy of the vaccine. And what that means is, does our vaccine protect somebody from actually getting the virus? So that's what we would be looking in that one. And then there's a final stage of clinical testing, which is called phase 3 clinical testing. And that's really very similar to phase 2, but just with a much, much larger number of people.
I see.
And so that's the kind of path we would be projecting to get this vaccine to market.
And so time frame would be, well, can you say?
It's very hard to give you, and I understand that's the question on everybody's list. It's very hard to give you an exact date, and I'm not trying to be obtuse, but it's really, there's so many different variables here. For instance, what does the epidemiology of the virus look like in the United States? If it suddenly goes away, then it's probably going to slow down our ability to test it. What's the funding supplies like?
Right.
Can the FDA help us make this go faster? So there's an awful lot of parts that we don't actually control. And so that's really what makes it hard for me to give you a hard and fast date.
Sure.
The one thing I can say is that we are aiming by the end of 2020 to have 1 million doses of the vaccine ready to be administered. So that's a really good start. Mm-hmm. But as we talk about the population of the US, which is sort of topping out at the moment around about 360 million people, we have to do a lot of scale up.
Yeah, that you would definitely have to increase those doses for sure. But when you say 1 million by the end of the year, you mean 1 million vaccines ready to be administered to every people, just not trials, but just whoever needs it.
So those would still be in a trial setting.
I see.
Potentially, we could, talk with the agencies about who could be enrolled in those trials. So we could potentially try and enroll people who are at most need for the vaccine.
Okay. What I'm curious about, Dr. Broderick, is that, as I said at the beginning of the interview, there are several companies and laboratories and pharmaceutical companies working on some sort of vaccine for COVID-19. And one of them, they started their trials yesterday. Do you work together? Do you work separately? Do you share information? Because it seems like everybody's racing to the finish line, trying to get there. So is it of course, my layman's mind thinks, wow, that seems like a waste of resources if everyone's working on separate tracks. But I would love to understand how that works.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the few positive things I can say that have come out of the events of the last few months is how the scientific community has really, really pulled together here and said, we probably would all get to, something in the end, but we'll do it much faster if we work together. So really the flow of information, the flow of reagents, of tools, of just knowledge has been really, really encouraging. Okay. And I think it's helped all of us move forward faster. We absolutely recognize, and I'm sure everybody would agree, that in a situation like this, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. Yeah. So I think, developing multiple strategies really is the best plan at the moment. And certainly over time, you can kind of tier those down. But I think at this early stage, you want to try different options for vaccines, try different options for therapeutics, make sure that you have a reliable diagnostic kit, and really putting all those pieces of the puzzle together will likely what will end up with a successful outcome.
Right. Well, we're talking about the vaccine right now, but the test kits, obviously we have a shortfall, a very big shortfall still, and that's being worked on. Are you hopeful that that's going to be boosted exponentially? Because obviously we're not at capacity. We don't have enough right now to test everyone.
Yeah, I mean, not even close. And again, this isn't really my area, but certainly what I've read is concerning. Although it does seem that, as you mentioned, these are really being scaled up at the moment. But without this fundamentally basic tool to be able to tell somebody you have it or you don't have it, it just makes the control of the spread of the virus really almost impossible, frankly.
Exactly. And on the back end, in terms of treatment, no treatment yet. They're all experimenting. Everyone's trying to experiment. But is that something that Inovio also is looking into, sort of treatment drugs?
We're currently not at the moment, although we do have some research in the area of monoclonal antibodies that are encoded by DNA. But at the moment, we're just really focusing all our activities on coming up with a vaccine.
Yeah, I think you have enough on your plate to come up with a vaccine, so I don't want to push you here. But here's my question to you in terms of having been an expert in this area for so long and having worked on several of these different epidemics around the world. Are we headed into the future of this happening more and more often and this going global, like COVID-19 has done, because we're such a global now community. Everybody travels and, you can't control it anymore. But should we expect this to happen again more often?
I'm afraid I would have to answer in the affirmative to that one, May. I think if you plot it sort of historically over time, I think in the last 10 years, we've seen more what we call emerging infectious diseases than we have at any time before in history. And there are very many, very obvious reasons for that. For instance, you can jump on a plane and in 10 hours be in Asia, Africa, Europe, wherever. So, just the scope of travel at the moment is nothing that the planet's ever experienced before. And neither, frankly, are the population dynamics. I mean, we're sort of bursting at the seams a little bit, and that puts a lot of pressure on viral spread as well. There's changes in the climate that's definitely impacting things. So there's so many different factors that come into play here that I think it would be a remiss to say that this may not be something that will happen again in the future.
Yeah, I'm no expert, but I would say those are all factors that would, of course, affect, this kind of virus going all over the world so quickly. Somebody was posting, I think a lot of people have actually posted this, saying maybe this is Earth just saying, I need a break, and just, saying enough. Who knows? But it seems like this is continuing to happen, and at such intense levels. So all the more reason that the work that Inovio and you are doing is so important. So Dr. Broderick, I've been asking every medical expert that I've been interviewing for the show, what would you advise? Because I'm sure you're probably getting inundated with questions and concerns and a lot of anxiety all around. From the average person. We're on lockdown here, we're not there, the whole social distancing and isolation, all these things are being thrown at everyone, and a lot of misinformation as well. So from your perspective, what can you tell people about what you know and what you foresee that might help them better understand what's going on?
Yeah. So let me start by saying, look at what happened in China. So over the kind of Christmas, New Year type time frame, what was happening in China was extremely frightening. But the events that occurred, the lockdowns, the quarantines, really, really helped to stem the flow and the spread of the virus. So we really need to focus on that and say that worked. And we need to be really diligent at trying to recapitulate that here in the United States. And I understand the frustration and the concern and the worry that people have about this. But at the moment, we have no vaccines. We have no therapeutics. As you quite rightly mentioned, we don't have enough test kits. So really, frankly, this is the only thing we can do at the moment. And we have to take all of this very, very, very seriously. It's insane to me that in 2020, the best thing that we can offer to people is advice to wash their hands. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it's so basic, but
right?
that's the one piece of advice that seems to be universal at this point. That's it.
Yep. And isn't that just crazy? It sounds like something that you might have got from the Second World War or something, but that's today. That is the best advice. As a scientist, as a mum, that's what I'm telling my kids, is just you make sure you keep washing those hands, because that's the best that we've got at the moment.
And not touch your face, right? So those
exactly.
two things. I don't want to end on a negative note, but I do want to be realistic also and get a little bit personal. You as an expert, having seen, all of this happen, over the decades, does this really scare you? Does it internally? Do you have a better way to say it is, does it make you more nervous than other things that you have seen?
Yes,
it does.
I couldn't sleep last night thinking about the fact that my children's schools are potentially shut down for months because of a virus that we are unable to control at the moment. And that's me speaking both as a scientist and as a mum and as a member of society. I never could have imagined that we would be in the situation we are today, and it's extremely frightening, and people really do need to take this very seriously.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure that motivates you even more to do the work that you're doing. And it's such important work. Dr. Broderick, thank you so much for your time. But more importantly, thank you so much for the work that you and your team are doing. It is truly amazing. It's heroic. The fact that you are working round the clock to try to get a vaccine ready for the rest of the world is truly amazing. So I just thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I know our viewers and listeners would say exactly the same thing.
Thank you so much, May. I mean, it's the least we can do, and we just hope that we can be part of the solution.
I think you might be. So I wish you well, but I would love to stay in touch and see how you're progressing with the trials, because this is probably a little bit of a long road ahead, but let's hope that we all stick together and we can get through this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, I told you that was going to be an action-packed episode. I hope you got a lot of information out of that from all those experts. So listen, we're going to keep on putting our resources towards covering this story and bring you more episodes, hopefully with more valuable information. Like I said at the top of the show, another upcoming episode will be all about the psychological effects that a lot of us are feeling, the isolation, feeling disconnected because we can't, get together with friends like we normally do. We can't handshake. We can't hug people. So we're going to be talking to a therapist, a psychologist about that kind of impact and what you can do to try to, manage that. Also, on a security level, going to be talking to a security expert about how to deal with the racism and the assaults going on, how to better manage it, how to cope with it, how to avoid it, just some practical tips from a security expert. So we're trying to cover this from all angles, and I totally appreciate your support. I love the fact that you guys are listening and watching and writing to us and commenting. So keep doing that. Because it gives us the motivation to keep doing what we're doing here at the May Lee Show, as well as at Next Shark. So we want to hear from you. Whatever you need to say, you can send it to us. Let us know, okay? And also let us know what else you want us to cover. Let us know what else you want to talk about, because that's important. All right? So until next time, everyone, stay safe. We're in this together. We're going to get through it. But, just be smart, be practical, be rational, and just, keep your spirits up in any way you can. Okay? All right. Take care, guys.